Uh, all right, 6:30. We like to be prompt. Thank you everybody for coming. I understand that there's ice forming around our houses, so it's lucky that we're on Zoom. My husband just told me I'm not going to go get the mail. Too dangerous. Um, so we have an exciting set of new programs here. This is our launching of what we're calling our online forums. And so thank you so much for coming. We're going to have them, and Dorothy, if I goof up or make any false statements, please tell me. But we're going to have them on the second Thursday every month and at 6:30. And our intent is to bring you new and interesting information, voices and concepts that you might not have heard about before. So any kind of feedback that you'd like to give us, we'd love to hear it. And again, this is the first one. We are the Lake Oswego Sustainability Network, for those that don't know. And our purpose in life is to promote sustainable practices here in Lake Oswego, but other places too. We want a safe and clean future for the next generations. And we're an all volunteer organization, not a nonprofit. And the way we do things is we have a lot of outreach activities like this event and others. And we also have project teams, action teams that work on a whole variety of things around the city, with the city itself, with the schools, and with individuals to help promote sustainability. And if you don't know about us or are interested in getting our newsletter, feel free to go to our website, LOSN.org, and sign up for our newsletter. And with that, I'm going to also introduce just a couple of other people. Mary, she's in my upper left-hand corner, and she is doing a lot of the technical background stuff. And so you might see her. And now I'm going to introduce our main speaker, but first, I guess I'll tell you what our program is going to be. We're going to introduce Rhys. He's going to say a few words, just a couple of minutes, and then we're going to go into breakout rooms and give you guys some time to talk about some questions. And the purpose of the questions is to get you sort of thinking about what Rhys is going to talk about. So we're going to have three questions for you to be discussing in your breakout rooms, and also it'll give you a chance to meet your fellow participants. After the breakout rooms, Rhys is going to talk for 15-20 minutes, and then he'll answer questions, which we are going to do by having you raise your hands, and we're going to sort of flip through the panels to make sure that we can see you. And that's how we're going to handle it. So right now we're going to have everybody muted, and I'm going to just spend a minute with talking about Rhys. So I met Rhys about 80 years ago. Was that right, Rhys? I met Rhys, I think, in about 2005. And I was a dreamy-eyed volunteer wannabe, and he let me volunteer in a new organization, in his organization, Climate Solutions, which plays a big part in my story of seeing how you can bring Oregonians and people of the Northwest together. Rhys is one of the founders of Climate Solutions, and Rhys has always been really interested in sort of the on the ground solutions to problems, making it real. What can you really do to solve things? And right now he's the executive director of the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure. It's located in Olympia, Washington, and bringing innovation, new tools, sustainability excellence to infrastructure planning. What's more basic than infrastructure? And he's going to talk a little bit about how some of that planning brings rural and urban people together. And he's going to give some real examples from his many years of working in this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Rhys. just to say a few words, and then we'll go into the breakout rooms.
Well, thank you, Lisa. And I'm sorry, I've got this yellowish hue. I don't have, what's that disease where you turn yellow? Is it jaundice or something like that? Or I'm not actually suffering from that, fortunately. I don't know why I'm all yellow, but nice to see you all. And thank you for the invitation from Lisa and the group. It's amazing. This topic to me is profoundly important in these times. And I mean, it is totally obvious in what's been going on in Oregon in the last couple of years, what's been going on, you know, at the federal level, at the nation's capital in the last, you know, month and a week, that we are toxically polarized as a society, and that it's putting us in a lot of ways in a straitjacket from being able to make progress on common sense, common ground kind of solutions that can make our lives better. And this is something that's nagged at me for a couple of decades. And so I guess I'll be talking to my experience in trying to work across those divides, build the bridges of understanding and common cause with opponents or people that feel that they're natural opponents to me and everything that we stand for. So I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I'm looking forward to your thoughts on, you know, what's the root cause of these divides, and how do we build those bridges so that we can start to create that connection and common ground and common cause with our fellow citizens.
Well, thank you, Rhys. I hope that gets you thinking. So we've got some questions for you to discuss in your breakout rooms. And here's 3 questions. And Mary, are those going to go onto the screen? I'll read them to you. The first one is, well, why are Oregonians polarized? Why are rural and urban people? What's behind it? What's on the mind of rural Oregonians? And the second is, what are your ideas about how some ways that sustainability could bring people together, which is a main part of Rhys's topic? And just to think about it, what are some ways that Lake Oswego might be polarized around sustainability, if there are any? Anyway, just some things to get you thinking and get us all excited about hearing what Rhys has to say in his experience. So with that, you should be led into a room. And for those of you who haven't had experience with breakout rooms, what we'd like is for you to start out by introducing yourself, get to know people in your room, maybe pick a leader to sort of give a very quick summary at the end, and then, you know, have a little discussion about the questions. Okay, so we're just going to spend a few minutes asking the people that were in their groups to just maybe give a 1 or 2 sentence update about what you discussed in your group. And maybe just to start things off, I'm going to call on Liz Welch, who is in our group, who is muted. So
Great. I'm muted. Yes, and I'm muted because I'm trying to navigate a lot of stuff on my screen for some reason. I don't know why there is so much on my screen. So we mostly talked about why Oregonians were polarized, and we didn't talk too much about bringing us together and Lake Oswego, but we talked about meritocracy, which is like the educated camp versus the non-educated camp. And do you really, if you're an educated camp, do you really have that many friends that are non-educated, and vice versa? We talked about how differences can get magnified on social media, and that people don't really spend time on talking about common ground, and the news media sort of polarizes us, and this cultural shift to be able to be that it's okay to be like polarized and have enemies. We talked about how sometimes the rural and the urban like they don't realize, maybe if we're talking about rural, they don't realize the economic benefits because either they're not promoted or they're not, the information's not available, or, and then we talked a lot about walking in.
Liz, you got froze. Maybe as one of the other group leaders could chime in.
I wanted George, who was in our group, to say a few words about what we talked about.
Yeah, I was with Miss Atwood and Mr. Buck. I'm George, by the way. I'm a senior at Lake Oswego High School, and this is my first meeting. I'm glad to be here. But we discussed a lot of the same things that Miss Welsh just mentioned. But in addition, we talked about how, yeah, education is necessary in order to communicate to people that there is a benefit, and how a lot of the more rural communities, the people are living, they've lived in these ways for many years, you know, and it's difficult to embrace like a great change to more eco-friendly solutions when they're kind of rooted in this. But also, you know, in the midst of a pandemic, I think people are more concerned about like short-term effects, as opposed to looking forward and thinking like, oh, in the long run, this will actually help us financially or in terms of stability. So that's been difficult. And then since I'm a high school student, we discussed a little bit of like insight as to this polarization stemming from just like political views, and how if people just begin like arguing one side of the spectrum, they just have like all of these preconceived notions thrown at them, particularly like for example, like liberalism is associated with like kind of like green thumb, like strong economic or excuse me, environmental priorities, versus like on the conservative side, people just uh, act like conservatives are more ignorant to environmental issues. And so instead of like fostering conversations, people are just making these assumptions. And I think it's detrimental to actually coming together and creating some positive change for the environment.
Thank you. Any other group leaders want to quick sum up what you guys were talking about?
I'll go ahead and go, and then please everybody comment as well. We, in our group, we had 3 of the 4 at least grow up in rural environments, which is really interesting. And we've had experience in big cities and other places. I think 2 things, since we didn't talk, one thing we talked about is that one of the things that might be a fundamental difference between rural and urban is the fact that rural, I think sometimes doesn't want, they want it to be more community driven. And in the urban, I think they're okay with the more statewide or government driven, you know, type of approach. And so you'll see that like in coyote killing contests, for example, if you get into like the animal side of things, they don't want anyone telling them how to do that kind of thing. So how do you overcome that piece to bring everybody together? And one thought we had was to bring, you know, to really reach out and try to get leaders in these different communities, people who are respected in the communities who don't agree necessarily with you, and get them in your team and get them involved in your team so that you can hear from them firsthand. But you know, we have to make compromises. I think, as George said, it's our way or the highway, and nobody seems willing to give a little bit. So at some point, you know, we have to prioritize all the issues, and then with a team of people who are on both sides and in the middle, you know, figure out how to prioritize that. But I know that everybody had some really good thoughts, and we didn't get into too much of it because the backgrounds were so interesting. But does anybody else in the group want to contribute to what we talked about?
Well, were there any other groups? I'm going to move it along so that we can get to Rhys. Cassandra, Cassie. Oh, you're muted. You have to unmute.
Sorry, I really wasn't raising my hand, Lisa. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
We had a far-ranging conversation, but I think the other 2 groups have mentioned most of our ideas. So thank you.
Kathleen.
Yes, I was in a group with 2 other people, and I was wondering if Rick Cook would like to speak a bit in regard to the Stafford Hamlet, in regard to being our very local rural area.
I'd be more than happy to. As you notice, Bill Mart is also on the screen here somewhere. He's our chair. But we've worked really hard over the last, well, probably 2 years of trying to work with a rural-urban interface through active agriculture in the Stafford Hamlet. Basically, Lusher Farm south to 205 and from Tualatin to Westland, and work with the 3 cities. And we've had great conversations with Mayor Buck and the other 2 councilors or mayors, and basically trying to get to a point where we can work with the 3 cities that have pretty strong input or imprints on the greenhouse gas effect in the area. I think Oregon City's the other 4th amigo that they have that are the top 4 emitters of that. So if the Stafford Hamlet area could be the carbon sequestration region bank for them, that's some of the things that we're trying to work on with that. So in our group, we also talked about the communication piece between what we're doing in the Stafford area. It's kind of the rural backyard to Lake Oswego and the other 2 cities. So we're really looking forward to getting our community vision plan, what basically says active agricultural through land purchases and conservation easements. So I'll leave it at that because there's just so much other things that we could touch.
Yeah.
And we will be in touch with you too.
Thank you so much, Rick. And I'm going to turn it over to Rhys now, but he will then lead a discussion after his presentation. So there'll be a little bit more time to have a lively discussion. And it's very cool to hear about how these issues are really coming home to us right here in Lake Oswego. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Rhys. Take it away.
All right. And I'll just tip a hat and point over to my colleague and co-conspirator at the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure, Ted Sturdivant. So he's a native Oregonian and a magnificent person who I'm going to ask to maybe just wrap up after I say some things and correct me on all the things I got wrong, and maybe he can help co-lead the Q&A. Well, so I really came at this, quite a while ago. I came at it as a 100% environmentalist when I got into this work. So that was my motivating passion. I did my master's thesis I finally finished it in 1990 on the greenhouse effect. You guys, I don't think George has ever heard the term the greenhouse effect, but way back when the climate change, global warming, we first started talking about it, people were calling it the greenhouse effect. So some of you probably remember that. And so as we come up, as we're approaching, 1997, 96, and the world passes this thing called the Montreal Protocol, where all the nations of the government, all the governments of the world kind of came together. They said, oh my God, the science is saying these specialty chemicals, chlorofluorocarbons, are floating up to the atmosphere and eating this protective layer that's protecting us from harmful ultraviolet radiations. We've got to ban these chemicals. And they set up a protocol and they did it. And so then we thought, well, okay, that's the playbook for global warming, for the greenhouse effect. Carbon dioxide, burning of fossil fuels. We're going to get all the governments of the world together and they're going to say, oh my God, the science is saying this is going to completely devastate all the people of the world and the planet's life support systems. We're going to do something about it. We're going to regulate that, phase out carbon emissions, and that'll be that. And then, boy, we came back from Kyoto, Japan, and then there was a vote in the Senate about whether the Senate should ratify the Kyoto Protocol, this international agreement that we thought would get us on the trajectory to solve the problem. And it was 97-0 against. Let's not ratify that. And at that point, I was like, well, whatever we're trying now isn't doing the trick. So we've got to get creative and think about new strategies. And, you know, being in the Pacific Northwest, you know, a lot of the opposition was coming out of, you know, there's a huge coalition of all the major industrial corporations in the country called the Global Climate Coalition that was lobbying hard on this Senate vote. And then there was a huge federal, you know, the national agriculture organizations were all united and pushing hard against this. And that's kind of what drove that vote. So we looked at it and said, well, a lot of this, you know, a lot of other places are producing fossil fuels in the country, but we're not. Like in the Northwest, that's not a big thing for us. And why don't we organize in the Northwest around the economic opportunity to get out front of the clean energy transition? And at that time, clean energy, there wasn't really a clean energy. That was kind of a term that was invented around that time, but it was called like alternative energy. And it was considered pretty boutique and strange and kind of like back to the land hippie kind of stuff. Maybe, you know, whatever preppers were called then might do it, but serious business people weren't that into it. So we when we started Climate Solutions, we kind of decided to focus on organizing around two segments that if we could get them behind this clean energy opportunity, then that could really change the politics. And we can control the Northwest a lot more than we can control federal. And this could be an opportunity that we could pitch. So we started to pitch the idea that clean energy can be a high-tech opportunity, the next big thing. We're already rocking it in software and cell phones, and let alone microbrewing coffee and airplanes. And we have the capability to change the national economy through innovative entrepreneurial companies. So we started organizing in the high-tech community. And so that was a big part of the polarization back then, business against the environment. That was a big thing. Now it's like rural, like urban is a big driver. So the other thing we organized around was around rural economic opportunities in clean energy. And we started organizing something called the Harvesting Clean Energy Conference that brought together the most conservative agriculture organizations and the clean energy advocates on a steering committee to organize a conference to share practical opportunities. The theme was rural economic development through clean energy. And we didn't require anybody to take an oath that they believe in climate change, that they're doing this to solve climate change, anything like that. It was just like, hey, we may not agree on everything. We may not agree on most things, but we can agree that rural economic development through clean energy is good. And we could work together on that, right? So we moved around from Oregon to Washington to Idaho, Montana in rotation. We did this like 3 cycles, 12 years running. And each state that we were coming into, about a year out, we would form a steering committee, and we'd start with the Farm Bureau of that state. So like when we were doing it in Oregon, we'd start with Barry Bashew and who became my friends Katie Fast and Gail Greenman of the Oregon Farm Bureau, got them on board and made them central to the steering committee. And then they recruited all the other ag organizations in the state. Happened every time we moved around. And then we kind of pulled in the federal agencies, the state agencies, except Department of Ag, which they did. Clean energy advocate organizations, formed a steering committee, and that guided the whole thing. And we really put an emphasis on practical, brought farmers in who could tell their stories of how they're using wind power, geothermal, solar, energy efficiency to boost their bottom line and to create economic development in their communities. And that practical orientation was really important too, because a lot of farmers were real practical. Some of the people I really admired from Oregon in particular, Tracy Liskey down in Klamath, a farmer there that pioneered kind of using geothermal to heat greenhouses. And so we would always have him. He was always on the steering committee. He would always come tell his story. A guy named Kent Madison Farms, absolutely extraordinary innovator in clean energy. And we gave both those guys, kind of in the last one that we did in Oregon, we gave them these awesome harvesting clean energy jackets with a big logo on the back and a patch. And so if you go and visit their farms now, I bet you could probably talk them into breaking out their harvesting clean energy jacket, because they were feeling pretty proud of it. And a guy named John DeMoss from Wasco County. And he'd always hang out with us at the end of the day at the conference. Is like a 3-day conference, and we'd drink and we'd talk about the whole day. And then he was always kind of quiet, but he'd always have this grin, and you'd ask him, well, he's a 5th generation wheat farmer. And he'd always say, yeah, I may be able to do something with wind power. I've got something in the works. And then it turns out he has the biggest wind farm in Oregon, I think, on his farm, and became a multimillionaire from it. And that wind farm and others are spinning off county tax revenue. Like the county has built an incredible city hall, and a lot of the problems that rural counties have, Wasco County, because of the wind development, is doing really well. Anyway, I guess one more story about agriculture, and then I'll shift to talking about infrastructure for a second. But in Idaho, and it's always key. Like I'm always like, they can smell that I'm an environmentalist, like from 100 yards away. So I'm not going to open a lot of doors with agriculture people. We always got to like bring along somebody that has the credibility, the street cred, the field cred, or whatever you want to call it. And so in Idaho, it was Dar Oberling and Stan Boyd. So Dar was the lobbyist for the Idaho grain producers, and Stan was the executive director of the Idaho Wool Growers Association. And we teamed up with this wind developer and hired them to lobby on renewable energy for us. And they would go to the Idaho Food Producers Association meeting. So this is the big meeting of all the ag organizations. There's like 20 different ag organizations in Idaho. And they would get up there and pitch the food producers on going on record in favor of a renewable energy standard, a clean energy standard in Idaho. And they would just say, Rhys, Rick, you guys just shut up and we'll do the talking. And they would always, and their message was really simple, guys. And it was almost all 98% guys, but guys, renewable energy is good for Idaho agriculture. Boom. And they would just leave it at that. And if anybody asks questions, they go into more detail, but renewable, and they would always repeat that to every elected official they met with, every agriculture person that they met with. And I love those guys. They're super entertaining. Obviously big kind of just cultural chasm. So like getting together and spending time, having drinks afterward, just getting to know each other as people, finding common ground. And again, I think just not coming into it, making them sign on to my environmentalist agenda, but to work from a place where, I mean, to me, if we can transition the economy to clean energy, that gets me to the solution to climate change, which is great. So I don't have to have you say you're doing it for climate change, as long as you're doing it. And if it's good for your community and good for your, I mean, that's super. More recently, how am I doing for, just want to keep track. I had a little timer here. Okay, I got a couple minutes. More recently,
you've got plenty of time.
Okay. More recently, I formed a nonprofit organization called the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure. And infrastructure is cool because it is really literally the lifeblood and the beating heart of every community, big, small, everything in between, east side, west side, vote mostly conservative, vote mostly progressive, vote purple. Every community needs quality functioning infrastructure. If we don't have that, our local economy can't really function. We can't really, who was it, Liz, whose power whose power went. I mean, we need power, we need energy infrastructure, we need water infrastructure, flush the toilet, take a shower. We take this stuff for granted, but if it breaks down, we're in a pickle and we get really frustrated. And so these are the biggest capital investments that we make in our communities. We're all paying for the infrastructure systems. The investments that we make in these systems are really long-lived, multi-decadal systems. And so we have a real interest in being as smart as possible and as getting much long-term value and benefit from our investments in these infrastructure systems as possible. So Center for Sustainable Infrastructure is about bringing innovation, best practices, new tools, new thinking to our infrastructure decision-making. And we work with communities across the political spectrum to help them with their really tough infrastructure challenge and to find innovative approaches that can benefit, that work really well financially, that can benefit the local economy, that can perform with excellence environmentally, that can help socially, enhance quality of life, create pathways out of poverty for people, and to help lift up people who are challenged. And I'd say in terms of bridging the divide, I'd tell one magical thrust of our work, and that is that over the 2017, 2018, and 2019 in the fall, each of those years, we've brought delegations of state legislators from Washington. We'd love to do this in Oregon in the future, but from Washington to Denmark. And they've toured around together and looked at super innovative, financially, economically, environmentally, socially, really smart and effective kind of innovative infrastructure approaches. And exactly, we've brought 26 state legislators on these tours. Exactly, well, 13 have been Democrats and 13 have been Republicans. And they've been from all parts of the state, representing all kinds of communities. And you get them over there and away from the pressure cooker of the Capitol, and the ideology and the polarization sort of melts away pretty quick. And they're just seeing these really practical, effective projects. And the Danes are not ideological. They're not saying, you should believe in democratic socialism and whatever, they're just saying, here's how we do it. It just makes sense to us. It works really well. Here's how we operate it. Here's all the details. And they're just very humble, and they're just so good at what they do. And it's just so smart, and it's so common sense that everybody's kind of looking, going, I could imagine how my community could adapt that. And they start talking together across the partisan divide and going, how would you adapt that? And then they start having conversations about, I don't really know that much about your district. I really don't know what's important to people. Tell me about your district. And they start to learn about each other's district. And they've come back with an appetite to collaborate across the partisan divide on common ground solutions. So they've really latched onto this idea of industrial symbiosis, which is where the waste from one industry becomes resource for another. And you have resource sharing, energy, water, materials that are circulated to the economic benefit of all the different companies that are part of a symbiosis. And so we're in conversations with a whole range of communities about how to adapt that idea. 3 times we've carried legislation through all the entire gauntlet, and never once has there been a vote against it. It's been a bipartisan, unanimous vote in favor of it every time. So anyway, that's been a beautiful thing. There's been a lot of synergy between that policy work and our innovation lab, where we're working directly with communities on their challenges and opportunities around infrastructure. So I think maybe with that, I'd turn to Ted. And Ted's just an extraordinary leader. He was previously Governor Gregoire's director of the Department of Ecology in Washington State, which is the equivalent of DEQ in Oregon. He was the legislative and policy director for Governor Inslee. He was the chief of staff for Hillary Franz, a public lands commissioner in our state. So incredible blessing that he has come to work with Center for Sustainable Infrastructure. Real treasure. But Ted, would you want to add anything to that? You're on mute.
Thanks, Rhys. Two things I'll add very briefly, because I think letting you all, hearing from you will be great. One is what Rhys just quickly summed up in terms of my background was a lot of years of like sort of in the trenches fighting, particularly over environmental stuff, but in the legislature. And to go from that to what you just listened to, and that this spirit is just a joy. So that's sort of point one. And what a better world. I mean, what a better way to work, and so that's really fun. And then just really briefly, the only thing I'll throw in, because that was great, Rhys, is, well, I'm curious, how many of you already know this phrase, the genius, the tyranny of the or and the genius of the and? Do you guys know that? Familiar with that? To me, like, you know, and I can't remember who, I think it was like an insurance executive that came up with that, or maybe I'm confusing quotes, but maybe it was even a book, but I just find that to be incredibly profound. And like the deeper I understand it and kind of sink into it, the more it feels like it's at the heart of what CSI is about and what we do. And it feels to me very much, and I think this, that evolving from the or to the and is what this new age demands of us, what this closed space, what the Anthropocene demands of us. And so in addition to helping communities, in addition to bridging divides, this work of sort of integration of and instead of or, like if we shift our practices and our mindset to that over time, if we sort of evolve in that direction, that just seems like the path out of this and to some kind of sustainability. And we all have to, you know, any vision of the future that doesn't include all the people that you don't like and that I don't like, it's not a real vision of the future, because they're going to be there. And so it's like we all have to be able to envision some common future that we all see ourselves in and is sustainable and is thriving and is healthy and is fair. So like that has to be the vision, I think, and that's sort of the vision that we work with. And as Rhys has, you know, really eloquently pointed out, coming to that through, you know, meeting people where they are rather than demanding that they come to where you are, you know, just doesn't work. So anyway, the genius of the and, I offer that all to you to chew on. It's given me all sorts of good thinking, and thank you, Lisa, for having us.
Well, you're welcome. So now we're going to just have a group discussion or an opportunity to ask Rhys questions. And I think I'm going to start because I do have a question, Rhys. I loved hearing, you know, this recap of this work that you've done, and some of it I actually got to see in person a long time ago. But give me an example of the infrastructure, like your top fun infrastructure from Denmark. You know, like what exactly, I mean, what are we talking about?
Boy, there's the one of the showcase most inspirational is the oldest industrial symbiosis project on earth. It was where the idea was pioneered in a little town called Kalundborg, which is about 17,000 people. And Novo Nordisk it's kind of the home of they do insulin, pharmaceutical insulin. So they're one of the anchors, but there's about 8 companies, producers, manufacturers located there. And over the course of about 3 or 4 decades, they've evolved this industrial symbiosis where heat is exchanged and moved along, and the heat emanating off one process is captured and transferred to feed the next process. Every gallon of water is used, reused, recycled at least 3 times. Materials are optimized, and the city is, over the course of this is initiated in just a private play, and then over the last decade or so, the city has really come in and built some facilities to capture the heat at the end, coming off the wastewater that is then fed to the community's heating district. So in Denmark, they heat a lot of their homes with through heating districts rather than through like burning natural gas or through electricity. So it's a different model. But anyway, in a town of 17,000 people, they are generating from the resource sharing agreements and the industrial symbiosis, they're generating $28 million in economic value, which works out to about $1,600 for every woman, man, child in the community. So it's really significant. And at the same time, they're reducing carbon dioxide emissions, the equivalent of 600,000 tons a year. And they're saving almost 1 billion gallons of water through reuse, recycle systems. So that's pretty extraordinary. They're really looking at wastewater treatment plants as biorefineries. So what is a big cost center here and a big taking all this wastewater and sewage and it's expensive and it takes a huge amount of energy, and they're really flipping that and really looking at that as a resource production, integrated resource generation facility. So they tap all that for heat. They develop clean soils, and fertilizer, and et cetera, et cetera. And in Billund at the biorefinery, they've actually got a partnership with the Lego. Lego has their world headquarters there, and they've been studying whether they can, from the biological matter, whether they can create bioplastics that can allow Lego to have a sustainable supply of for their Legos. So anyway, I don't need to go on and on, but a couple of examples.
Cool.
Rhys,
Well,
I thought you were going to say the garbage, the trash incinerator with the ski jump on top.
who else has questions? Duke. And you're muted. You have to unmute yourself.
This is a question for Rhys or Ted. Can you give an example of the and/or issue that you're talking about?
Yeah, Ted.
So the industrial symbiosis example that Rhys just described in Kalundborg, as he alluded to or mentioned, we have a piece of legislation moving through the legislature. We passed it last year, creating the very first program in the country, but it got vetoed because COVID, the budget was collapsing as the governor was signing bills, and all the spending bills got vetoed. So we're running it again this year. And we've got a community, a poor timber town on the Southwest Washington coast. They've been
depressed for years and years, Raymond, Washington, and they are embracing this notion. So normally an economic development conversation about Southwest Washington or Raymond is a pretty limited conversation. It's sort of, kind of often sort of, scraping by sort of what's left of natural resources. And because we had just come back from Denmark with this notion in our heads, and I happened to work here and Rhys happened to be working at CSI, we were able to help get some legislative money to that community to try on this industrial symbiosis thing. And that's been sort of working for the past few years now. And so they have come up with a notion. So what would have been the case had we not done that and had the legislature not invested in sending Rhys down to do this work, they would have been talking about a pellet mill made from hardwood waste, financed by Korean investors for the overseas market. And there'd be a mill that has more pollution than was there before, that employs some people, which is awesome in Raymond, Washington, and has the normal sort of, pollution in terms of water, in terms of air. But the and comes in with this, well, why don't we take a broader, more complex, integrated view of this and say, well, okay, so we care about that, and we care about this, and we care about this, and we care about this. If that were true, like, how could we maximize across all of these sort of values? And what they came up with our support is this notion that, so there is this anchor of a pellet mill, but then they are capturing heat and et cetera. I won't go into the details, but there's a mushroom grow operation, an algae production operation. If they can get this machine from Japan, they can solve the county's septage problem, where they have to haul all the septage like to the next county and spend umpteen dollars, and God knows how many sort of rogue septage haulers that creates. So that's an example of so many more people winning through this sort of and notion of like adding, I'll close with this. Dwight Eisenhower said, if you sort of can't solve a problem, enlarge it, and more possibilities emerge.
Other questions or comments?
So I was wondering, in Portland, is there a way that they track carbon emissions, like looking to make the city more eco-friendly? Do they have, or do like some environmental organizations that Rhys, you may know of, or Ted, do they like have particular industries or producers of carbon dioxide that like are in a list, for example?
I think so. And Portland and Oregon in general has been a pioneer of another way to sort of do greenhouse gas accounting. The typical way is to draw the boundaries around our city or around our state or around our nation and say, what are all the sources of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases coming from, pipes and cars and, exhaust from industry and everything else. What are all the emissions within our boundaries? And in particular, Oregon DEQ pioneered this, but Portland's kind of at the forefront of adopting it. Another way to look at the emissions is to say, what are the emissions coming from all the way up the supply chain that brought the products that we're consuming to us? So if we're buying products from China, what's the climate footprint? What's the emissions associated with that production? Because the planet doesn't really care whether, the emissions happen in China or here. And if we're buying it and consuming it, let's add all that up and let's take responsibility for that the whole footprint. And they find that our greenhouse gas footprint, when we look inclusively like that at the whole supply chain, is about twice as big as if we just look at what we emit within the borders. And so that points to things like in East Portland, the City of Roses Disposal and Recycling is an extraordinary, it's the only African-American owned waste management and recycling company in the country. It's a B Corp, a social benefit corporation, and they are developing a campus where they can bring together cutting edge Oregon companies that can take different fractions of the waste stream and recycle it and put it back into productive use in the most environmentally effective way possible. So that kind of business is going to be able to help shrink our footprint in a way that a lot of other strategies can't. So there's some really cool stuff happening in Portland that I'm glad you brought that up, George.
Yeah, that's great.
Dorothy?
Well, you have our mayor and you have this community organization, our mayor of Lake Oswego, and a community organization that loves to do stuff. So based on what you're doing, what would your advice to us be on what this suburban community could do, and what are some different options that you would suggest to us?
Oh boy. I mean, if we're on the theme of polarization, like how to bridge the polarization, that's a really creative conversation that'd be fun to, for you all to kick around. I'd love to hear what ideas you come up with. Gosh, I mean, just thinking about the rural farmers, timberland owners, the rural communities, how to build bridges, how to, send a delegation, maybe, I mean, I would love to like go to Kent Madison and say, whatever products you're producing, I want my local co-op to carry them because you're just on the cutting edge and you're doing beautiful things. And I want to connect this, and rather than bringing food in from, Chile or something. So I don't know. I don't know the answer right off, but Ted, you probably have a great answer to that.
I don't know. The boldest thing I can think of is, and I would just love to see this happen more and more. And since you're a local gathering of people, find some way to come into contact with such a group on the other side of the mountains, or, and like, I mean, it just, I think someone mentioned it earlier, but the idea of people kind of getting together in intentional conversation to see if greater sort of mutual understanding could happen. I think I hope to see that in the landscape. So that's one idea. And the second thing is this. So through all my years of working in government, mostly up in Washington, you could not capture my attention by talking about infrastructure. Just wasn't going to happen. And no one really ever challenged that. So let me just say this: infrastructure, of course, enables all the wonderful things about life, right? We drink clean water and travel on our roads. So we talk about infrastructure and what it can do. What we don't really talk about, and I've realized only recently, is infrastructure, which is this boring thing that I could never be bothered with, lasts for freaking decades. And not only does it enable us to do things, it constrains us from doing things. It defines what we can and can't do in fundamental ways. The technology today exists that I could drive over to the Tri-Cities and see my mom without any pollution, but the infrastructure doesn't exist. And so I pollute when I go. That gap is very real. Excuse me. Oh, I just lost my train of thought with that little cough. So sorry about that.
Well, Rick,
Just help me out.
Rick threw something in on the chat. I'm just sorry. I'm just noticing the chat. I forgot to look at this, but Rick, great video on how Idaho saved over 4 million acres of wilderness, foes learning how to work together, and great views of backcountry Idaho. Cause you to think about how to approach others.
Good. Well, that can save me.
Right on, Rick. Yeah. And if anybody's in a position to sponsor a delegate or inspire a foundation or a government agency or somebody has sponsored a delegation to Denmark, we've discovered that can work magic. And like if you'll sponsor their trip, legislators are willing to go, even if they're not necessarily, consider themselves sustainability advocates, but they often come back much more of a sustainability advocate than they left. So.
Can I have a question? Can you talk a little bit about how that town began to do that? Because do they pay everybody $1,600 so if more people are interested in buying in? Is it just a governmental thing because they are primary socialist country? But how does that happen?
It doesn't
organically happen, right? It doesn't,
You know what? We think of Kalundborg as we think of Denmark as, kind of socialist, democratic socialist, but they're really, really good capitalists, not like in an exploitative way, but just in terms of business and industry, and they're very effective and they deploy capital very effectively. And this was actually initiated by the CEOs of 8 companies that would get together once a month and, have lunch. And they started to talk about, I got to figure out what to do with this waste, and what am I going to do with that, and what are you going to do with that? And they started to compare notes, and they go, well, I could actually use that, the sulfur dioxide to produce wallboard, and so they knitted it together and they drove it for the first decade or two, and then they started to bring the city more in and more in. So now it's a real collaboration between city and the way they do utilities in Denmark is interesting too, because here we have separate utility for electricity, separate one for natural gas. Natural gas is a weird thing to have a utility because it's fuel and it should be around the service. You want electrical service. Regardless of what creates the electricity, but anyway, we have natural gas utilities. That's weird. So they have, we have a wastewater utility, we have a water utility, we have a solid waste utility, and they're all separate and they have different budgets and different mandates, different leaders and different, systems. They're kind of unified. And so they bring them all, multi-utilities so that they can sort of look at optimal ways. And a lot of times, if you look at infrastructure, if you can deploy it in an integrated way to solve multiple needs, it's going to be most efficient and smartest and most sustainable. So they're real smart in that. So anyway, it started as a private sector play and was led by that. And now it's a fully integrated public-private kind of dynamic.
Rick?
Yeah, just got a question. When you talk infrastructure, usually it's, pipes, sewers, water, all those things. How do you start that conversation of developing that safe, secure, sustainable agricultural infrastructure? Is that even remotely talked about there anywhere?
The kind of work that you're doing in terms of developing those sort of resilient, sustainable,
right. And just as a collective across the states and world, do people actually talk about agricultural infrastructure at all?
That's a really good question. I mean, we bump into it. We bump into it because they there's irrigation districts, there's, you know, wastewater coming out of food processing. They need water supply. They need electricity. So, but is there a, you know, how do you think about it in a more integrated way and a more comprehensive way and a long-term way? I think the siloization is just as much a challenge for agriculture and agriculture communities as it is for the rest of our communities. So I think that's a provocative question that we need to think about.
Can I add a little?
Go ahead, Ted, sorry.
Thanks. Rick, just my sense is, and your question is one that we've actually been asking ourselves too, and 2 or 3 years ago, I helped put together a Washington delegation for this really cool event in DC, sponsored by the Doris Duke Foundation, but the Natural and Working Lands group of the U.S. Climate Alliance sponsored this thing called a Learning Lab. And they had delegations from 17 states come. And what I learned there was that, and have observed since, is that the climate solution opportunities to be found in natural and working lands, in terms of sequestration, et cetera, not the clean energy piece, felt like, I know that they had decided there's nothing happening and nothing going to happen nationally. So the energy is at the states. And so my hope is that as we start to go there in terms of being able to monetize, I think it has to be part of that. But it feels like that's going to explode in the next few years. It feels like it's ready to go. And so we're asking similar question, which is, can this approach of ours, which is based on sort of integration in your infrastructure investments, what would that mean if we started to see innovative opportunities, you know, from ag land in the next few years? And I think we're headed there.
And I think somebody mentioned one time that 70% of all the world's food is raised on less than 2 acres lots, which I was floored at, and I haven't been able to research that. But if we could string all those 2-acre lots together as an infrastructure piece, you know, we're on our way.
Yeah. Ag lands and forestry, there's so much we're not doing.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. I appreciate your work.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question, and I can wait for Dorothy to speak first, but since I can't raise my hand, I'd like to just be in line.
Please go ahead.
Dorothy, do you want to go first?
No, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much, Rhys and Ted. I really appreciate everything you're talking about. And I personally, I come from the education side. I teach at Lewis and Clark, and so I'm wondering if you have any experience or any guidance on whether this kind of work also takes place sort of like for younger people, or whether you know of organizations or know of work being done that kind of, in a way, maybe paves the way amongst younger people to sort of like, so that we don't have to wait for them to be adults to think in those ways of like, here are joint opportunities for all of us. So is there something that brings urban and rural youth together, and that kind of does some of that work that otherwise happens kind of in the realms where you work?
Is your name Katya?
Katya, yes.
Katya. Oh man. Well, you're asking a question, but you're kind of spinning out a vision that is super exciting. If we could just reframe it to like, how do we do that? Because that would be wonderful, and that's a real need. And I can't point to something that exists. Maybe George knows, but I will say that in all across all the categories of infrastructure, that everybody, like most of the leadership, most of the employees have hair as silver or more than mine. They are, nearing retirement. There's going to be a lot of operational wisdom and know-how lost if we don't begin to inspire and attract the next generation. And the next generation can learn the new, innovative, integrated, new kind of thinking, new approaches, sustainable, resilient, integrated kind of approaches. And it can be a super exciting field, even though, you know, like Ted said, it's for most people, it's eyes glaze over, boring. But these are really, it's a really good career. You can make a beautiful difference in your community. And so I think informing and attracting and inspiring the young people that you're talking about, Katya, to this realm is really important. Real opportunities to build career ladders for people in poverty now, or you know, that could be going into poverty. So super, super important.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Dorothy, and then Bob.
Well, I saw Jeff Goodman's comment in the chat about Silverton, Oregon, and both Rhys and Ted were talking about wastewater treatment plants. And I did a lot of work with energy around wastewater treatment plants. And I always said that, you know, the operators think that they're cleaning up the water, but what they really are is they have a piped energy source. And, you know, we have that opportunity here in Lake Oswego. I'm really not sure how far down the pipe, no pun intended, it is, but, you know, that could be a great district source of heat in the foothills area. There could be some really, really fun things that we could start to think about for that area around that, using that as the sort of the anchor.
Oh, I love this. And Jeff, I really want to, if you can get my email address and send me something about Silverton. I always point to Gresham's wastewater treatment plant, Alan Johnston, who runs it there, and Hillsborough's Clean Water Services as national pioneers, innovation pioneers, state of the art on a lot of levels. Rick, I think it was Rick talking about agriculture, but boy, the in Hillsborough, the Clean Water Services has developed probably the most important scalable watershed restoration program in the country, and that about 35 different agencies, state, federal, private agencies, all contribute money to a coordinated watershed restoration program that pays farmers to restore native habitat around streams and native cover. And they're both operating their wastewater treatment plants as more biorefinery than just a cost center. So Dorothy, I think that's a great idea to look at, you know, what is the deal with Lake Oswego's wastewater treatment plant? Are there opportunities to advocate for real innovation there, and having these pioneers in Silverton and Hillsborough and Gresham that can be kind of coaches or mentors or examples, at least for your wastewater treatment operators, is a great resource.
So Bob, do you mind if we go to Jeff first and then you? Would that be okay?
Go ahead.
Jeff.
If you Google Silverton, Oregon Garden and wastewater, you will be overwhelmed with articles.
Okay.
Bob?
Well, I visited that wastewater treatment in Silverton. It's wonderful. Everybody should go see it sometime. But my comment was, it's more of a comment, I guess, but maybe relates to the gap issue that somebody mentioned. I think the current administration is considering a lot of infrastructure in terms of the internet to rural communities. And, you know, that sounds, you know, and it's striking that we're having a meeting tonight with you sitting in Olympia and us sitting in Lake Oswego, and who else could be all around. And then I was sort of inspired, you know, we could have a sister city sort of program. We have one nominally, I guess, with Japan down here, one of the park, but we could have meetings like this with people in rural communities, using this service. And one wonders about maybe some new opportunities may arise if, in fact, the internet is more widely distributed to rural communities.
Cool. Any other comments? Let's see, we're just about ready to go, and to me, I feel like, George, we are all of our eyes are looking at you. Maybe you should go to Denmark. We should figure all that out. Bob, you were going to spend 1 minute, 30 seconds talking about the next online forum, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Yes, we have next on the schedule, March 11th, another forum, and this is a rather different kind of forum. It has to do with the rising interest in hydrogen as a sort of storage mechanism for taking electricity from clean sources like wind and solar and putting it into a tank and then storing it for weeks and months as need be, and maybe powering trucks and trains and things like that. Or if we need to, burn it so we can generate, or actually burn it to make steel or cement. But anyway, this is a whole new awareness of an energy resource. And we are pleased to have Ken Dragoon, who is now working in Lake Oswego with one of the local companies that is installing solar panels down in Southern Oregon, and they're going to have an electrolyzer set up there so they can make hydrogen when they're not using the solar panels to supply the grid. Anyway, it's an interesting topic. I hope you'll join us next March 11th.
Okay, thank you, Dorothy, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, another upcoming event even sooner is coming up on March 20, what month is this? February 24th. Is that in 2 weeks from about 2 weeks? No, it's not Thursday, it's Wednesday, the 24th. It's associated with, it's a event on environmental justice that's being co-hosted by us, LOSN, and Respond to Racism, in honor of the Lake Oswego Reads program this month, the book Cast. So please join us for that. That's at 10 a.m. in the morning of the 24th. You can register on our website.
Thank you. That will be so great, both of these next events. And thank you, everybody, for coming. I want to give a really great thanks to Rhys and Ted, and we'll be sending out in our follow-up emails about how you can learn more about what they're doing and contact them. But it's very inspiring, and I'll have to say that, Rhys, you've inspired me since the dark ages, since I met you, and I was inspired tonight. So thanks for these new thoughts, new ideas. And again, thank you to all of you in our community who supporting us by attending this event. And then it is our first. If you've got ideas, comments, thoughts, as we go forward, go ahead and email. We'd like to hear them. And with that, we will bring this event to a close. Thank you and goodbye.